Finally, we get to see Delta in action, and how many out there counted how many times we got to see her undercarriage? Like every 2 shots is her back end coming towards the camera, and it's like, I ain't complaining. Delta's very interesting, though. Delta is a very interesting character. I like that Alexia at some point makes a comment about, there's no way that Delta works for Shadow. Shadow is very refined in his combat capabilities, and Delta just seems like a wild animal. Why in the world would Delta be working for Shadow? Like, the entire time, but Beta wants to speak up, and she's like, well, maybe she's the Tolkien musclehead. Poor Delta. No, but no, it was interesting because, like, it really did seem like Delta was almost of two minds. Like, she was a split personality, because at some points she would kind of stop and her eyes would change to normal, and she'd be thinking about things like the fact that her mana is being absorbed and her suit's disappearing, which is great. But then other times it's like she suddenly just snaps. Her eyes go like crazy looking, and then she's just a pure beast. So I don't know if that's like a split personality thing, or it's just like her instincts kicking in and she just goes berserk. She's a berserker kind of thing. So I'd be interested to see if they at some point explain that. But yes, it was still cool to see her. I still am upset how much this series kind of relies on just action stills, you know, sliding stills with things kind of shifting around with the still, just so it doesn't look like it's completely a still, but it was still cool. It was still cool to see her in action. All the way to the point where she made a gigantic spatula, I guess, and just... was it iron slab or something like that, and just smashes them all. But no, it's very curious because it seemed like this whole thing was built up in the idea that they went inside there, they got the memories and information they needed, they got to the very core of it, had to fight this guy, and it was absorbing their mana while it was boosting him up, which doesn't mean anything because Delta's still going to destroy him. But it kind of ends sort of anticlimactically in like the idea that at some point Epsilon shows back up and she's like, all right, I discovered a way out. All right, let's go. Peace out. And the guy's like, wait, what are you doing? Where are you going? We're still fighting here. I just got Olivier out. We're not done yet. And they're like, no, we're good. I mean, you can follow us if you want, but peace out. So I'm guessing, yes, this whole thing was just to investigate what he was doing. They don't necessarily need to stop him in there. So it makes perfect sense that they're like, all right, we got what we need. Why would we stay in here where technically he has the upper ground, basically? He eventually is going to have to come out, and when he does, we can expose him and destroy him. Oh, I almost forgot, yes, before Epsilon shows back up and says that she has the exit. They had one scene where she's pointing out the fact that this memory is reacting to the fact that they are the possessed. Yes, we've kind of already gotten the hint that pretty much all these girls at some point were attempted failed experiments by this group to make another Olivier. And those failed experiments in the possession, they just became big blobs. And then, yes, Sid eventually found them, cured them of that, which apparently, according to the big wig guy, it's a technique that was lost at some point. Like, it's been this technique to restore them back to normal has been lost for ages. But yes, at some point, she starts to notice that all their slime is starting to disappear, and then they just fall down. It pulls it back up and says, "You guys see something? You didn't see anything, did you? What'd you see? What'd you guys see?" I'm sort of a little saddened by this. Like, I really do hope, like, this is it. Like, we've done the joke 2 times now. Let's move on. Like, I hope that that's not Epsilon's only joke, and every time Epsilon's in the scene, she's gonna do that, because beyond this point, it's gonna start to get old. I technically caught it last episode, it just didn't really hit me, but, like, it felt like it was very purposely that when he first jumps out of the water, the whole screen, like, shatters and it goes into, like, a different realm. It felt like a boss intro for, like, a Final Fantasy game or something like that, where suddenly the boss comes up and then all of a sudden it goes, psh, and then you're on the battlefield. It's like, it seemed like a little bit too obvious. Or would it be Tales? I think it was a Tales series that did that. I think even Xenogears did it. But no, on the side of Sid, the interesting thing that I kind of noted, and I don't know if they mentioned it in the previous episode, like, the entire time, Sid is keeping one eye closed. And I don't know if he's doing that because he knows that maybe he's trying to keep one eye closed so that he's always kind of semi out of this memory zone. Because obviously, if you're in this sort of memory, you're playing by the rules of the memory. And I almost think that he's doing that, and it's eventually he's going to point out the fact that he's always been keeping one eye closed. That way, one side is always outside of this memory, and thus outside of the rules of it. Or that he believes that his mana is being sucked out because of his eyes, so if he keeps one closed, the eye patch thing. I remove one eye and suddenly my full power is revealed. But it seemed like it was kind of going out of its way to point out the fact that he was always keeping one eye closed. But yeah, so we're hanging out with Aurora this entire time. I don't know if they mentioned it before, that possibility that the witch is Diablos, the one that had their arm cut off. But I'm thinking at this point, I believe that's Aurora. I believe Aurora is going to be Diablo's, unless I missed at some point they specifically said that. But I'm just based on the fact that they keep showing her at some point she's in the middle of the battlefield, everybody's killed. I'm assuming that's the battlefield in which Olivier came in and cut off one of her arms and thus had that. Again, I know they reference Aurora. I know they reference Diablo. I just don't know if they ever I don't know if they ever said that Aurora is Diablo's. I think that's the thing they're trying to keep separate purposely, in the idea that one's a witch and one is this demon. And that would also explain why at some point in this episode, the guy says, if you can promise me that you'll work with us because it's difficult to work with you, then we'll wrap this up. It does make it a little bit curious that the fact that Olivier didn't immediately attack Aurora, if that was the case though. Of course, they indicated that technically Olivier didn't have a heart, so she's like a shell of what she was. I'm sure that eventually they're going to somehow break through to her and get to her emotions and make her realize that she doesn't need to be fighting, but it does seem like she's almost like an empty doll that just does whatever he says. I like the fact that when they first go to this core room and she points out the fact that, no, you need this sword in order to open this up, it needs a key. He's already pointed out the fact that, yeah, I don't think I can break this thing. He can look at things and know it's just not going to work out. Just like pulling the sword. He just looked at it and says, I know it's not going to work out. But it does seem like based on his hands, it looked like some kind of formula was going across it, that he's trying to figure out some way of fooling the system to thinking that he is like of a bloodline. But I like the fact that when he goes to pull out the sword, he's yanking on it, it cracks the ground, and then he pulls away, and you can see like the handles all shattered. But yeah, I guess it technically makes sense that the fact that Aurora is kind of trapped in this whole situation. She wants to destroy the core. That way, the whole system kind of breaks. Thus, this eternal prison that she's in of her memories will be broken. It just kind of makes me curious in the idea that all the other visions they've kind of showed of Aurora is that she's a child inside this facility. Not that she's some sort of great beast that's somewhere else that they manufactured Olivier and sent her out to take out Diablos or Aurora and then bring back apart. She's always technically been in there, which is more curious as to why it's difficult for them to get parts when she's technically in there and she's stuck. Unless they need her to transform into some different form, because the arm that they got, Olivier brought in, was this massive arm, so it's obviously not the arm of a little child. So maybe they need her to transform at some point and she's not working with them well. But yeah, insert typical Sid joke, waiting for protagonists to show up so they can pull a sword and everything end, which is not going to happen. Baldy guy shows up, he thinks he's the protagonist, and then Olivier shows up and they start fighting. But they're like arguing about how they're going to handle the situation. He's like, hey, wait, can I have a say in this? Why are you all acting like I've been defeated already? And it goes back to the whole thing of like the worst background character ever. This idea that Sid, you're technically being given an opportunity to be a background character. They're saying, no, he can't defeat Olivier. He's just a human. You would think that he'd go, all right, yeah, that's true. I am just a background character. I can't defeat this. The protagonist needs to beat this. But no, he's like, no, I need to beat this. So I guess it's one of those aspects, and maybe it's just not really translating well to the anime. Maybe in the light novel, it gets a little more inner dialogue, and this idea that maybe he has two sides of himself. One is like, because he points out that he was smiling. So I'm kind of assuming this whole back and forth in his own head where, yes, he wants to be background character. He doesn't want to be the one that resolves the situation. The protagonist needs to come in and grab the sword and break the core. But then there's a side of him that's getting excited about the fight that he's in. Like, fighting Olivier excites him. Like, here's somebody that's actually challenging him, even though, yes, he's obviously waiting for a moment, and that moment finally came at the very end. He's like, I finally got you, and I'm going to release all my super abilities. All I can assume is maybe he wanted to be impaled by Olivier, that way he can get some sort of the code from her, this bloodline that awakens the sword. But it's still, I kind of wonder if there's a side of him that keeps pushing back his desire to be a background character and the desire to actually fight something that's really strong. Or maybe an aspect of pride getting into a system and the idea that everybody assumes I'm defeated and I'm not. I know how to beat this girl. I'm just waiting. He was technically insinuating that he was trying to talk to her, like exchanging blows in order to communicate to somebody on the battlefield, that kind of concept. But yeah, overall, solid episode. Really enjoyed it. Again, mainly because I love seeing Delta fighting. And yes, more slime suits melting away, which is always spicy and interesting. I almost forgot. We had another moment where Alpha had to get Delta in check. She's like sitting there growling at Olivier, and she's like, Delta? I was like, oh, wait, sorry. Yes, okay. Whenever Delta gets that kind of panic face, she looks exactly like Karu from Precon. So I'm like, yes, My Karu from Princess Connect is here, and she's alpha. She totally, her face just looks like spitting image of Karu. But anyways, that's my thoughts on episode 13 of Eminence and Shadow. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. As always, if you did, make sure to hit that like button down below. Comment, let me know what you thought of the episode. Additionally, if you're new to the channel, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you get all my content. I do news, reviews, first impressions, top list. If it's anime, it's pretty much here. Additionally, if you want to support the channel more, we have a Patreon link, tips link, and a super thanks button down below. Special thanks to Martin, who just became a Patreon supporter. I greatly appreciate the support, and y'all take care.